A good evening. Wanted to make a video here to talk a little bit about survey design. So the point of quantitative research, and as we've talked about, is to try to get at and find these quote-unquote universal truths, these truths that exist in the world that we are trying to objectively find. Now, in the social sciences, we are trying to find, we're often studying things that don't exist in reality, right? So this table, I can measure the table. I can get a ruler. I can say it's however many inches. I can get a yardstick. I could lay out and say it's 4 body lengths. I can quantify it, right? But in the social behavioral sciences, things like that, we're studying things that don't exist in terms of, like, I can't pick it up and feel it. Aggression. It's not something I can pick up and feel. Democracy. That's not something I can feel. Political, one of the ones we do, political interest. Like, so so we have to measure things that don't exist. And we have to measure them in observable empirical ways. That's what gives us quantitative research. So it's called referential realism. Sorry, I'm laughing. You can all meet Derby the dog. Derber. Hey, Derb. Hey, buddy. That's a Derby, everyone. He was making a racket. That's Derby. That's my best friend, Derby. Referential realism, as we get back to it. Back to bed, big guy. You're okay. Okay. Referential realism is this idea that we treat things that as real, these concepts, like they're real. Okay. So, like, hey, if you want to measure how interested someone is in politics, we could do a survey and give them questions like, how interested in politics are you? Or whatever the case would be. So we then quantify it. It's like on a scale of 1 to 5, or how strongly do you agree with the following statement? Not at all, somewhat, neither agree nor disagree, right? So there's something called Likert scales. There's all kinds of different survey measures. So we use surveys to try to get at people's attitudes and opinions, okay? When you're designing a survey, a lot goes into it in terms of the questions. How you word a question will greatly impact the responses you get. The order of which you put questions, and all this is in the PowerPoint slide that I uploaded. How it's administered, the response options you give people. I'm looking for a book on my bookshelf about design. And there's just too many details to go into, especially in this class. I'll tell you, when I was in graduate school getting my doctorate, I did a minor specialization in survey design. I took 6 different courses on surveys. So it is a big field and it's very important. I joke and I say, if you know what you're doing with surveys, I could design a survey. If you're a company and you wanted to show that your product or something was the best product in the world at what it does, I could design a survey that would get you whatever results you were looking for, but would look completely legitimate. No one would question, like, oh, that seems biased, that seems weird. No, it would look legit, just knowing how to manipulate those things. So, like, for example, if you think about question wording effects, there was a study like in the 80s, and they had 2 surveys, and they were studying survey effects, and they asked the question pretty much, do you think, so they were asking Americans, do you think that Russian journalists should be able to come and report on what's going on in America to their Russian audience? Okay. And this was at like the height of the Cold War. And then they would ask, the next question would be, do you think American journalists should be able to go to Russia and report on what's going on in Russia? Now, those 2 questions, they had 2 different versions of the survey. In one version of the survey, they first asked, do you think that American journalists should be able to go to Russia and report? And then the next question was, do you think that Russian journalists should be able to come here and report? The other version of the survey was the exact same survey. It had all of the other questions, except it flipped them. And it first said, do you believe Russian journalists should be able to come to America and report? And then it said, do you think American journalists should be able to go to Russia? So what do we find? What they found was that in both cases, people thought American journalists should be able to go to Russia and report on what's going on in Russia to a much higher level than they thought Russian journalists should be able to come here. However, there was a huge difference in the magnitude of that. When they asked them the question about American journalists first, it was like something like 84% of people said, yeah, American journalists should be able to go. And then the follow-up question was like, yes, 65% said Russian journalists should be able to come here. When you flipped it, it was like 40% said Russian journalists should be able to come here, and 60% said United States journalists should be able to go there. So what happened was pretty much there was an anchoring effect where in the first case, people said, yes, American journalists should come. So then when you ask about Russian journalists, they think, well, I just said that it was okay for us to do that, so I kind of have to be consistent. And whereas in the other occasion, when you first ask about Russian journalists, it's just like, oh, no, I don't think they should be able to, because there isn't the context provided already of giving an opinion. It's just a very small example. We don't do a lot of surveys nowadays are like online, and Qualtrics is an online survey site that we're going to be working with next week. I'm going to have you start working with that we have through IUP. It's an online survey service that you can set up surveys and send it out and have people do it. But back in the day a little bit, like a lot of surveys were paper and pencil, and a lot of surveys were even interview, where you would have people come into a lab and someone would ask questions and record the responses. And it did a really interesting study. Like they had white interviewers asking black participants, like, can you name the best, your top 3 favorite performers right now? This was in like the 60s or 70s. And when a white interviewer asked black individuals this, they would hardly ever list a black performer in their top favorites. If a black interviewer asked black participants, it was almost, their lists were almost exclusively, their favorites were black performers. Goes to show who was asking the question, not even the question itself, had a huge effect on things, right? So there's all these different kinds of things, and I can provide people with all kinds of resources for survey design if they're interested. But a good survey is valid and reliable, and their questions are valid and reliable. Most of the time you're studying things that have already been studied in some capacity. So again, in like my area of interest, political, discussion, whatever. So like political interest is a variable that we often use as a control variable. It's, it's actually a 2-item scale of like how interested are you in politics, right? It's asked a certain way. Just slipped off the table here. There is a specific wording and response options for political interest that's kind of become the norm. Like if you're gonna measure political interest, these are the 2 questions you use, and this is how you ask it. So in your study, if you are using political interest as a variable, a control variable, an independent variable, a dependent variable, anything, and you didn't use those 2 questions and those responses, say you made up your own thing and you send it out for review, they would say, what is this measure you're using? What are these questions? How do we know that they are valid in that they are actually measuring political interest? And how do we know that they're reliable? There's a way to validate questions and survey answers, and it's a long process. There's certain steps and techniques, but it's a long process to validate a set of questions or whatever to say that they are valid and reliable. And it takes multiple samples, and it can take years to do it. So when there's something out there that exists that's become accepted in the field, use it. In other words, in your field, there will be questions, there will be survey items, there will be things that are commonly used. When in doubt, if you're using those same type of variables, use what already exists. So if you're trying to find if you want to measure, like I said, people's aggression, there are probably 30 different scales of aggression that have been validated and deemed reliable that are used over and over that you see in published journals. Choose the one that best fits your needs and use it. You cite it, you reference it. There's nothing wrong with that. So don't try to reinvent the wheel. Don't make up your own thing. First, always go and see if the measure already exists. It's the biggest tip I can give you. If it exists already and it suits what you're trying to do, use it. If there's just nothing out there that measures what you're trying to measure, then you're going to have to create your own thing. But then you're going to have to argue for its validity and its reliability. Some things to think about when you're doing survey research and survey design. Like I said, so Qualtrics, Qualtrics. If you Google Qualtrics, IUP, so 2 words, Qualtrics and IUP, you can log on to your Qualtrics account through IUP. If you Google that, there will be a link to it, and you can start playing around with the Qualtrics survey website. And I'll do a video in the next day or two, screen capturing me playing with Qualtrics so you can see how it's done. But you can log on. Everyone has a Qualtrics account through IUP that way. All right. So just some things to think about when we're talking about surveys and survey design. And please look at the PowerPoints and the book and all that kind of stuff. And you all got so lucky you got to meet the big fella tonight. Come here, Derber. Come here, bud. Come here, buddy. This is Derby. Derber, sit. 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 This is Derby. He is 4.5. He is his daddy's best friend, and he is a great big brother to his 2 little human sisters, right? Yeah. Okay. I don't know why I decided to show you Derby here tonight. He was down here working with me. Disregard all of that if you're only interested in the survey stuff. All right. I will talk to you guys soon. Say bye-bye. Okay.